this convention this weekend was a different experience from going to the convention in New York City last year. Coming to this convention was something like coming home. It was a beautiful feeling. Not many clergymen have it. I don't think I should waste your time at this spiritual meeting to try to go through any kind of war stories of my own to qualify. There will always be some kind of confusion just what to do with me. I am of the fellowship, but not in it. But that's the war story. I'd rather use the time greedily and speak totally about spirituality at this spiritual meeting. And these days, you never really know where someone is listening to a tape. And so I address these remarks not only to you gathered in these sacred walls of this sacred educational institution, but I address it to all those who may be listening to this tape months from now by the side of a road. A few months ago, in the dead of night, I have a hotline that comes into my room now. I get a call from someone in the Midwest who didn't really believe too much in his higher power, but God was always very close to him. He was riding towards his connection, turned on the tape, thinking he had another kind of tape in, but on comes the tape of the World Convention with blithering me saying something that I can't remember what I was saying, and he had to get out of the car, threaten the operator, and she called me long distance and tell me that he couldn't pick up after he listened to the tape. Particularly, I got a letter from someone on the way on a train heading to Atlanta. Missed a meeting, definitely needed a meeting badly, but he had his batteried tape recorder. He played and replayed the old violin, and he wept a bit and said, I can't do what I was going to do halfway to Atlanta. And so I'm addressing these remarks to wherever our higher power may take them. Every one of us at this moment have one thing in common. And that one thing that we all have in common is the key to every problem we face on this earth. It is the search for happiness. When we were younger, when we were quite macho, when we were quite cool, man, we really thought that we knew what happiness was. And all the while we were pursuing pleasure and found no happiness. The older we grow, the longer we stay in the program and keep moving up those sacred steps. We begin to truly understand with grateful humility that I now am beginning to understand the difference between pleasure and happiness. For pleasure is a passing thing. Happiness is deep. Pleasure is usually in the body. Happiness is in the soul. Before coming up to this convention, I picked up a book sent to me by the government, just released, written by 50 professionals in the field of drug addiction, offering 50 theories to the solutions of the problems of drug addiction. Now, this is for real, no garbage. Some people are making money on drug addicts. They're getting rich on writing these papers. In the fellowship, you can't take a position on any outside causes. Maybe there's an advantage in not being in the fellowship, because I can say they're all stupid, because 50 different authors are all writing heavy papers heavy papers with strings of degrees, but not one of them comes up with the one thing that brings us here this morning. There wasn't one note of spirituality in that thick book, and believe me, I combed through it looking for a fight, and there wasn't one mention of spirituality. The search for happiness is a journey, and we're all pilgrims on this earth on that journey. There is an old Latin word, educare, which came to mean education, which means seeking, leading to a way. When Danny and Peter first invaded this campus, this fortress of education, and tried to sell the fact that this fellowship has a way, that this fellowship is leading to a way which is education in the truest sense. Only God knows, and they know, the patience they had to exercise dealing with these great educators. And finally, they came to a decision that perhaps Narcotics Anonymous might have something in the way of education. And so today it's the case of the tail wagging the dog. And today, here we are wagging this institution because we have what educators are looking for, and they can't see it. And walls could talk, these walls would be reverberating with the words of that song that should be perhaps our slogan song. We're poor little sheep. You remember the Wolf and Pupper song that goes to Yale? Who have lost our way. Bye, bye. Anyway, it's a song that goes, we're poor little sheep who have lost our way. Well, we lost our way at one time. We really and truly did. But now, thanks be to this fellowship, this program, we have found our way towards that way of true happiness and not just pleasure. God, our loving Father, as we speak about so often in our traditions, that God is a loving Father to us, is a way, and it is in finding Him that we find the way, for He is the way, the truth, and the life. At a spiritual meeting, the very first question that should come up to us is this: if our fellowship is essentially a spiritual program, then what do we mean by spiritual, and what do we mean by program? Well, every now and then we meet people who are in a program. I'm on the methadone program. Congratulations, I'm on a methadone program, and the program is only methadone. But in our NA program, we take it totally. We don't divide it in pieces. And perhaps if I'm not totally in the program, perhaps it may be that I don't understand what spirituality really means. Perhaps this is why I get all hung up. Not me, but I say I'm you and you're me. We get all hung up at meetings. Somebody announces a softball game, rah-rah softball game. We're going to go on a fishing trip, rah-rah fishing trip. We're going to go on a boat cruise, rah-rah. Even though NA cannot sponsor anything and give its name to anything, nobody gets upset if we sponsor a dance or sponsor a boat trip or a softball game. But if somebody ever dares to sneak in a little announcement about something spiritual, we don't know what to do. But that's all right. I'm learning that word. It's all right. In time, it will... But you see, it forces you to look at a possibility that there may be something wrong. Of all God's creatures on this earth, only the human person has a spiritual dimension. And many, many times, people who are physically healthy, look at us, who are socially healthy, culturally healthy, economically healthy in every aspect, may be walking around with a soul that is starving for food. And all too often we can come up with the quotable quotes that we can all quote from listening to other people's stories. We make the quote our own, and we think that it has gone from the head to the heart, and we've accepted it. What do we really mean by spirituality? Spirituality can be compared, obviously, with that which is material. We know what material is, but as we grow older, we do begin to realize that every single thing that I have that is material can be destroyed. Every single thing that I have in my room that is material can pass away, will pass away, can be stolen, and can be burnt. And the older we grow, the more we mature in the program, we begin to see that the only realities are in the spiritual order. They don't weigh anything. They don't take any shape. They don't take any form. But they are the realities that shape and mold and give meaning and motivation into our lives. Spirituality. People go to prison for justice. People die for truth. How heavy is truth? The grief that we shared and spoke about in yesterday's meeting is a spiritual thing. How heavy is grief? What shape does it take? How heavy is compassion and kindness? These spiritual realities that sometimes we shy away from because they're not too easy to talk about. Perhaps the reason why we do not dwell so much on the spiritual realities of my life is because they may be too superficial. And I can't talk too much about them like I can talk for hours about my war experiences. And so what do we mean by spiritual? As a person, I'm body and psyche. I'm body and spirit. I'm body and soul. As a person, I have brains like an animal has brains. Some animals have more brains than we have. So you make a mistake to say that the brains think. If that were so, then God could not think as I understand him. He has no brains. and your mother and father now in heaven that you can still speak to and they can still know you and love you is because even though their bodies have long since turned to dust, the real mother, the real father that you have in heaven is soul, is spirit, not brains. We have feelings in common with the animal, and only the person with reason and grace can control emotions and feelings. So in many, many cases, we have everything in common with the brute animal. But spirituality means that of all God's creatures, I alone have a soul which needs food, which needs to be nurtured, which needs to be fed. One doesn't come into the program and say, well, if I go to 90 meetings in 90 days, I'm going to get something spiritual. I'm going to be a spiritual person as soon as I go to those 90 meetings. Comes the end of the 90th meeting, well, God, I'm ready. Something is supposed to happen, God. I went to those 90 meetings. But then we find out that nothing really has happened to me yet in the spiritual order. Because spirituality must be cultivated and nurtured like anything else. Nobody can play tennis in 10 minutes. One must practice and practice and practice. Nobody can play any kind of a sport game without practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing. And if you don't practice, you get a Charlie horse. So in the spiritual life, unless I practice faith and truly exercise that faith day by day, decision by decision, meeting by meeting, unless I practice hope, I'm not going to have it. And so how do you really cultivate the life of the spirit, the life of the soul, which more of you want, though you may be a bit timid about saying you wanted it? One of the biggest surprises of attending the How It Works meeting yesterday was to find out that so many of you, and I hate to pull your covers, but so many, many, many of you pray on your knees. Oh, and that was such a revelation. But we said it in a closed group, in a closed room, but we knew that in that group we could say it and nobody would laugh at us because we were all praying on our knees. It wasn't macho. If anybody walked in the door and they saw me praying on my knees, what would happen, man? What would happen? As one of the speakers said, she sponsors her people and says, well, if somebody might laugh, hey, go into the bathroom and pray while you're shaving. Pray while you're on the john. God understands. It's prayer. And so one of the things I'm finding out then is that more of you are praying on your knees, not slavishly, but more humbly. And in that position of humility, opening up, emptying myself, there is more room for God. I told some of you on retreat the experience I had some time back at an old man's wake when we were cleaning up his belongings. We found his old prayer book, and in the back of the prayer book, this prayer that only an old man could make up. Oh dear God, every time I look at me, I always seem to see me in me. Dear God, kick me out of me, so that more of you might find room for you in me. We so often get in God's way, and perhaps this is why loneliness is a symptom of my inability to get in touch with a God as I understand and a God that I need. And so if I am able to pray, I should say to myself, that prayer then is nurturing and feeding my soul like food feeds my face. How then else do I feed my spiritual life? One of the great theologians, and theology isn't too bad once you begin to understand it, theology once said that spiritual reading is the oil of the lamp of prayer. Deep down, we all want to pray a little bit better, particularly when we're alone, when we feel the yen to pick up, to go out, and I know I shouldn't. At that moment, to be able to pray, really pray, not say words, but to pray, it may well depend on how much good spiritual reading you do every week. If every day on the way to work, on the subway, in the train, or the bus, you just read this for 5 minutes, or 3 minutes, or 2 minutes before you leave the house, it nurtures your own contact with God. It keeps it alive, so that when you're ready to really pray, your soul is more warmed up. It's in tune with your higher power. Again, spiritual writers tell us that one of the things that nurtures and preserves our spiritual life and keeps us spiritual and more involved in the spiritual aspects of our program is to get away at times, at least once a year, away from everything, away from the phone, even away from sponsoring, away from everything, and go on a spiritual retreat. It is difficult, I confess, to talk to a large group like this about something strictly spiritual. AA, from whom we have learned so much, went through the same experience 45 years ago. I knew well the Father Dowling, who used to walk a great deal with Bill W. And when Bill W. and Father Dowling are walking together and battling about the steps and the meaning of the steps, it was never intended that power, as we speak about, that I'm powerless over my addiction, that there is a power above me in the second step that can help me. It was never meant that that power was like the Connecticut Life and Power Company. They meant that power was a person, not an inanimate power like the wind or electric power or some other kind of power, but it was a person. We have to at times get away from everything to get closer to that person as we understand him. So it was such a wonderful experience 2 years ago, unknown to me how God works, when 3 guys from the New Haven area captured me down in a church in New Haven where I was giving my preventive education drug program, and they came up with this idea, how would you react? And they came up with this idea, how would you react if we named a retreat after you, Dan Egan? Well, right away I began getting self-conscious. Most of us have an obsession about self, whether it's going to make me feel good or bad. And I said, no way. And I fought with them. And I came up with a new idea. I said, I know a saint that's been canonized by the church. He died on opium. His name is Saint Lung Hu. And the answer is, well, who the hell is Lung Hu? And I thought that was rather sacrilegious. After all, the guy's a saint, but they explained to me that years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when I'm long since dead and buried, and we're having an eternal convention in heaven, who will know who Lung Hu is? And so they convinced me, well, Dan Egan is at least a name that many people perhaps will associate with the Junkie Priest book, and people that I've known in prison. Linda and I were in jail together. Excuse me for blowing your anonymity. There is none here. Out of that little meeting downstairs in the rectory came the germ of this idea that AA went through. Years ago, when guys and girls in AA wanted to go away and make a retreat. They didn't know how to go about it because those sacred traditions boxed them in. AA couldn't sponsor any retreats, so what are we going to do about it? Well, a group of them got together and searched, and they found the name of a famous Irish drunk. And of all drunks, there are no drunks, you can fill it in, like the Irish drunks. Matt Talbot was a great drunk. And so they got the idea, why not name the AA retreats after Matt Talbot? In a few years, when Matt Talbot is canonized in Rome, they predict that 1 million drunks will descend on Rome. And even the Polish Pope won't know what to do with all those people who come for the canonization of Matt Talbot. There's no even hint that I'm on the level with Matt Talbot. But we're in the same situation right now. There's a growing movement within NA for something that can nurture and feed our spirituality. We would like to get away to certain places where we can spend the whole weekend, not like a convention, going to bed anytime, no time, and coming in half dreary and asleep, but to go away in a serious business of learning a little bit more about the spiritual principles that are the very essence of our fellowship. And out of that germ came the first Dan Egan retreat. And humbly, right after that, we had 2 in New York. New York does everything not 2 times better. So we had 2 more in New York. And the first weekend in August, we're having one in Philadelphia. You may sign up before you leave. A group in Boston are now talking about having one. Some people... that can nurture our spiritual life, that can preserve it, is good. Because if ours is a spiritual program, then there must be some way that we can become more spiritual. We are not less members of NA by becoming more spiritual. Because the more spiritual you become, you're more involved in the total program and not just part of it. Every meeting, when all the noise is finished before the meeting, I always find that something rather dramatic happens. That is, when people are talking and talking and talking, suddenly the meeting starts and we feel a presence. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. When we say the Our Father, there is something I'd like to share with you that means a lot to me from my spiritual life. Many, many times when I'm at groups, and that's really where NA is, the group. When I'm at groups and I don't want to participate, I just sit there and pray. Nobody knows I'm praying. Maybe some other people are praying when they've heard this war story 10 times. But I'm praying that somehow or other, the grace of God will get through, and whatever this guy needs, because I got him there, and I hope to God that the speaker will say something. Gradually out of his mouth comes something that I never thought about saying myself. And so if a meeting is ever boring to you, start to pray that the speaker will say something to the weakest member in that group. The second thing, when we stand to say the Our Father, may I tell you something that is historically true and biblically correct. We know the one who made up the Our Father. When he made it up, he was talking to people whom 90% of them spoke Aramaic. Only 10% of the people in our blessed Lord's time understood Hebrew. And so in the translation of Father, it had to go from Aramaic to Hebrew, to Greek, to Latin, to English. And we lose its meaning. The original word used by Christ was Abba. And Abba is a word that we're about a bit timid to use. But in Jesus' time, it meant daddy, not father. Father is kind of formal. And perhaps many of us here who are still in grief over our fathers perhaps never knew the father that picked me up, that took me fishing, that taught me to pray, that went on hikes with me, that I felt comfortable with. And perhaps that father word stands as a block to my understanding God as he really reveals himself to be. So when you're thinking about God and trying to understand him more slowly, patiently, gradually, please think of him more kindly. He isn't the father that catches you with your hand in the cookie jar. He's the father who says to you, when he catches your hand in the cookie jar, have two. Of course, it depends on what the cookie jar is. When we're reaching into that cookie jar and looking for happiness, let none of us ever be so stupid again as to ever believe that that happiness can ever be like that elusive rush of the first experience on cocaine. The rest of your stupid life, you're going to still be trying to get that coke high, and you'll never achieve it. It isn't like the good philosophically or the happiness that we speak about in the soul, in the psyche, that remains, but it's elusive. The jar that we're reaching into is that happiness we've always been looking for. That acceptance, that love, that understanding, which is the real answer instead of some of these slick, cheap answers why people become drug addicts. As I grow older, I understand now that each one of you that got into drugs because you were searching and searching and searching for that which meaningful people somehow couldn't give you. The acceptance, the security, the love, the forgiveness, the sympathy, the compassion, which all human beings look for. No wonder St. Augustine, in his True Confessions, could say this, that our hearts were made for thee, O God, and restless ever will they be until they find rest in thee. We will try everything, but nothing can ever give us the security, the true peace, the stability, the acceptance, the mercy, the forgiveness that we can find in God as we understand him. And that is the spiritual part of the program. Don't give up on it. Keep after it. Search for it. Be hungry for it. Have an appetite. Never be so satisfied with it that I have enough. In our spiritual program, all of us, however, do reach times, moments. Temptation from the devil is very real, but I'm still a bum. I'm still no good. I'm a reject. I came out the wrong way. I was born the wrong way. There's some stigma on me. At those moments, then maybe you ought to replay this tape. And I don't mean that everybody should have a cell and buy the tapes. recite not from memory this time because it's too important, too precious. The old violin, for that moment, when either the grief or the pain or the loneliness or the hurt or whatever it may be almost driving you to pick up. It was battered, scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his while to waste his time on the old violin. But he held it up with a smile. "What am I bidding, good people?" he cried. "Who'll start the bidding for me? $1, now two, only two, $2. Who'll make it $3? $3 once, $3 twice, going for $3. But no. From the room far back, a gray-haired man came forward and picked up the bow. Then wiping the dust from the old violin and tightening up the strings, he played a melody pure and sweet as the angels sing. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quiet and low, said, "What am I bid for the old violin?" And he held it up with the bow. $1,000. Who'll make it $2? $2,000. Who'll make it $3? $3,000 once, $3,000 twice. And going and gone, said he. The people cheered, but some of them cried, "We don't quite understand. What changed its worth?" Swift came the reply, the touch of the master's hand. And many a man with a life out of tune and battered and torn with sin is auctioned cheap to a thoughtless crowd, much like the old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and he travels on. He's going once, he's going twice, he's going and almost gone. But the master comes, and the foolish crowd never can quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that's wrought by the touch of the master's hand. Each one of us here at this moment are precious because we're spiritual. There's an area of your being that no nightstick of any cop can reach. There's an area of your being that no trick can ever reach. There's an area of your being that no society can reject. And that area of your being is the spiritual element. That is why this is and must always be a spiritual program. And when we stand up at the end of the meeting and pray the Our Father, please remember scripturally that when we say, "Thy kingdom come," we in the fellowship mean only one thing. May the fellowship come for all the sick addicts out there. May they know the kingdom that we have found. For other sheep I have that are not of this fold. We have found the fold. We're safe in the fold. After your groups, your streets, the monotony, the drudgery of tomorrow, please believe in the spiritual part of the program that when you wake up tomorrow, and you turn your life over to God as you understand Him, to someone you trust enough and love enough to trust enough to give your life over to, that day is the first day of the rest of your life. That day is the only day that God has given to you. And that faith in the spiritual part of your being can turn monotony into meaning, drudgery into romance. Things can take shape for this day. Tomorrow, all hell may break out. But spiritually, I'm occupying God's time at this moment. If I were the only person on this earth at this moment, God loves me. And how much does God love me now? This much. And then He died. Bless you all.
Thank you, Father Egan.